It's that time of the year again, everybody. Welcome to the Steam Winter Sale running now through January 4th, 2024. Here are my strategy, sim and RPG recommendations with time cards below. First up, Against the Storm. At 35% off, bringing it down to around $16 though regional pricing may vary. This game is an absolute gem. It doesn't matter where you look or who's reviewing it. It's one of the most popular PC games of this year, actually, right up there with Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of reviews, and for good reason. So what exactly is it? Well, in a game of Against the Storm, you are playing on this grand map, but inside of it, each mission, each level, plays out in its own way. You start by building a settlement and gathering resources, the objective to clear forests, open up glades, to potentially find more resources, more events to send your peoples on and so forth. Throughout the level, you're also racing against the clock, right? Against the storm, it's literally in the name. And what this does is it builds a really important sense of urgency right from the word go. Not just to get the materials and the resources to keep yourself alive, to keep your little dudes alive, but also to race against these orders, these kind of objectives that you're set, roguelike, like many other parts of this game, to try and complete certain things as you build up your town or your colony. Now, while you're racing against the storm and the pressures that it brings, while trying to complete these orders, you're also balancing out other things like resource management, defense, and so much more. Achieving delivery of the orders will give you a little bit of boost in your reputation, unlocking more things for your towns and settlements, and again triggering that race against the clock as you try and get better and better, more resources, more events, and more people. Once you finish, if you successfully beat the storm, of course, you can then move on to another area. It's a brilliant roguelike town builder. Next up on my list, a big change of pace. This is Baldur's Gate 3 at 10% off. A surprise discount for what is undoubtedly the game of the year. 10%, I know, it's not a huge discount, but frankly, we're kind of lucky that we got anything. Baldur's Gate 3 offers some interesting challenges. Will no more innocents die today, or will I let this bad dude finish them off for the absolute? Well, of course I will, and that's the beauty of Baldur's Gate 3. The decisions that you take throughout this really grand Dungeons and Dragons dice-based RPG, though you shouldn't let that part put you off if you're maybe unfamiliar with it or how it works. The game handles it beautifully, adding that element of randomness in and alongside these awesome dialogue options, where here again, I'm deciding, yeah, you know what, actually, you didn't do so well, hun. But it's also much more than just the best RPG of the year, maybe of all time, ? It's also got turn-based strategic combat, so even strategy game fans out there can feel nice and at home. The complexity here is not to be overlooked. The level of customization and detail in your merry band of 4 is honestly just incredible. Multiplayer, super fun too if you'd like to bring some friends in and along on the journey, but the story itself will be more than enough to keep you captivated. The decisions you'll have to make or want to make, and everything else that surrounds Baldur's Gate 3 makes it an easy recommendation despite it only having a 10% off discount. There are, of course, a load of other great RPG games if you're looking for something that's slightly more friendly on the wallet. Moving down a little bit, Elden Ring, another fantastic game that released last year at 40% off, or The Witcher 3, an easy recommend here too. And now a very quick message that all I want for Christmas is you to subscribe. Please subscribe. Help us reach the 75k milestone for Christmas. Now back to your video. The next entry on my list, another one that could be Game of the Year, Age of Wonders 4 at 30% off, brings it down to about $35. Now when I say it could be Game of the Year, I mean it could be my strategy game of the year, because it didn't really reach quite high enough to win any of those awards with anyone else, it would seem, but I think it deserves it. It's a 4X, the first 4X game on our list, that features turn-based combat, as you can see here, and some wonderful artwork, world building, level design. Everything that goes in to create this world is really nice and really satisfying to use. It's also a fairly easy strategy game to pick up, at least in comparison to some of the other things we'll be talking about on this list. The level of customization inside of Age of Wonders 4 is another huge selling point with your faction as it grows and develops as you move through, and the recent updates have been brilliant. Not just with things like this item forge here, another layer of customization, but also something that I think isn't often talked about enough, and that's the AI. The AI in Age of Wonders 4 is really good, really competitive. I've found it's improved a lot over time, especially with the recent patch updates. I think it's a really solid 4X strategy game, well worth your time. Next up, Workers and Resources, Soviet Republic, 35% off, about $25 US. Do you like brutalist, concrete architecture, layer upon layer, grey upon grey? Do you like planned USSR economies in an ultra-realistic economic simulation? Well, this might just be the game for you. Now, forewarning, there's a steep learning curve, and it's pretty hardcore. It simulates everything, right down to that concrete that we were talking about before. How you make it, where you produce it, will you have enough to build the buildings that you want to build? And that's just one small example of how a supply chain might play out in this game. They are deep, detailed supply chains, rich simulations. This is for the strategy gamer, the city builder, who really wants to sit down and delve deep into the detail. And if you do, I think you'll be left with a very satisfying experience. The game is still in early access, receiving fairly frequent updates. The developers tend to put out a release at least about every 2 weeks, talking about what they're doing, and of course, game updates and patches follow. I think this one is, like I say, a bit hardcore, but a really fun and great recommendation, and a new recommendation for this list. Next up, a tried and true one, so I'll keep it brief. Anno 1800 at 75% off, about $15, and also it's 4 season passes are 50% off each as well. So the full collective sort of 5-year golden edition will set you back about $50. If you're new to this kind of game, you could of course start with the base game, but you'll soon probably quickly discover that you want more of Anno 1800, because that's the kind of game that it is. Arguably the best title in the series, though I'm sure there'll be some commenters who might debate me on that below. This one is an easy recommend if you like resource management, city building, and a relatively complex but easy to use economic sim. Speaking of sims, welcome to City Skylines 1 and City Skylines 2. Now Cities 1, 70% off, big discount. Cities 2, 10% off, not so much. They both come with really difficult recommendations to make. City Skylines 1, let's start there. Probably the definitive city builder still, despite 2 having been released, and I'm not sure that many people would fight me on that right now. However, if you're just picking up the base game, you might feel like it's a little bit bland. So you're probably going to need to invest in some DLC, or of course, you could look to the modding community here instead, which are a huge, brilliant, and actually working force inside of what is actually quite a legacy game now in City Skylines 1. The footage that you're watching, though, of course, is from City Skylines 2, the new game, aiming to be the definitive city builder, and having only released like 2 months ago, 10% off discount. The Baldur's Gate 3 treatment, although probably for very different reasons. City Skylines 2 has had a bit of a rough launch. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you've heard me talk about this many times, so I probably don't need to go into great detail. The recommendation here, though, is actually, well, it's fairly straightforward. At 10% off, it's not a great discount. You don't need to rush out and get it because it's 10% off. If you've been waiting to buy it though, honestly it's probably in the best state it's ever been. Performance still struggles at 50,000 population cities and above, even on the best of computers, and there are definitely more bugs to fix, including ones in and around how the economy is actually simulated. But it is in a reasonable state. We're expecting modding to drop next year alongside many more updates, so my general recommendation would be, unless you're desperate, it's probably a hold off, but I wanted to mention it here nonetheless. Next up, 4X historical strategy, starting with Old World at 25% off, about $29. This one is probably one of the lesser known 4X historical strategy games, of course competing with the likes of Civilization and Humankind, and maybe upcoming games like Millennia and Art History Untold. It could be a crowded space. This game merges elements of Crusader Kings 3 with Civilization. That's a simple way to put it. It's also not quite doing Old World justice, because it's much more than that. But in a nutshell, because this is a relatively quick and highlight-focused video, Old World will pit you in against 2 different challenges, both building a civilization, but also managing the people within it. Not just your leader, but their family, their relationships, their marriage, and the sort of difficult politics and social situations and events that might emerge around that. And all of this sits on top of a very fun, satisfying to use 4X strategy game, with the kind of mechanics that you'd expect with some notable exceptions, including an undo button. Please, put this in more games. I misclicked so often in strategy games, it's not even funny. Thank you, old world. Another thing it does well quite uniquely is its orders system, where movements and other significant actions like buildings and all that kind of thing, enacting laws, basically focus off the same currency, orders. So you have to make difficult decisions as to what you'll do and when you'll do it. Lots of fun. Equally, lots of fun, Sid Meier's Civilization, the franchise, specifically here talking about Civ 6 and Civ 5. Let's start with 5. If you want to pick it up, again, the bundle is kind of your only option, the base game, not apparently receiving any discount whatsoever, but if you want to jump into the bundle, you can, and honestly, you probably should. Civ 5 is a good game, a great game, when it has its 2 main DLC packs with it. When it doesn't, it's pretty bland. And of course, it's a fairly old experience now too. If you're looking for something a bit more modern, perhaps the definitive 4X historical strategy game, then you should likely look no further than Civilization 6. The base game, cheap as chips. The anthology would be my general recommendation here. Tends to be the best bang for your buck, though if you're looking to purchase slightly on the cheaper side of things, of course you can pick up the base game, especially if you're new to the franchise, it'll be a great buy. I would again recommend that you at least pick up the 2 main DLC packs for it though, Gathering Storm and Rise and Fall. Of course, you can pick up the extra DLC civilizations just like you can with 5, but they're arguably nowhere near as necessary as those core 2 DLC packs. So those would be my broad recommendations for the Sid Meier's Civilization franchise. If you're looking for an alternative, of course, Humankind is a reasonable pickup here too. Moving through to something a bit more grand and quick. Paradox Grand strategy games, Stellaris, Hearts of Iron 4, and Europa Universalis in particular are 70% off. I'm keeping these recommendations quick because they are both for just the base game, so it won't suit people who are looking for a more detailed experience. Again, newer players to the franchises or to the genre will be best suited here though, probably. But also, because we've talked about these games many times, and they almost always go 70% off. So, don't stress, if you can't get them this time, you will be able to get them next time. And again, probably some DLC is needed, at least the kind of new player starter pack recommended DLCs. If you're looking to really sink your teeth into one of these experiences, I'd recommend you pick one and get the DLC rather than splitting across all 3. Second last, the penultimate recommendation, Eurotruck Simulator 2. One of my favorite games that I first thought was kind of a bit dumb, to be honest. And as I started playing through it, I realized it was awesome. I have resisted the urge to buy a steering wheel and some pedals, largely because it's far too expensive. But man alive, that would be pretty fun. But back to the recommendation though, this is the dream truck simulator. Other truck simulators are available. It's so cheap, go get it. And finally, on my list, we're talking turn-based tactics where decisions matter, with a strategic overview of building bases and trying to fight off an alien invasion. And in this case, we're talking about Xenonauts 2, which is 25% off, around $27 US. That in of itself is a pretty good deal for a game that's fairly new, and it's a nice change from the original, a beautiful refresh, animations, that kind of stuff. Although, if you're looking to enter the franchise a little bit cheaper, it's important to note that the original, Xenonauts 1, is a great deal, 75% off, about $4 US. And of course, the king of the genre, XCOM 2, I'd recommend the collection at 90% off. And that brings us to the end of this video. There will of course be games that I've missed, plenty, so please do let me know below if you have anything you'd like to see. In my second video, I'll probably make 2 for the sale because it's a pretty beefy one. I'll see you next time.